so much. Wunderful. It's a
Every
great book as well.
90%.
I know that many of those people at Glenbard are doing a book read for the department, so I encourage that
Mhm.
as well. Let's get started. Ebony Baker has the first question. She is the Naperville North High School Counseling Department Chair, District 203. Take it away, Ebony.
Good morning. Thank you,
Good morning.
Elizabeth, for such amazing information for us to consider. I think a follow-up question that I have for you is in regards to when counselors or case managers should begin the conversation on that list of accommodations that you mentioned that students should have going into their college search. Is that a junior year conversation or at the start of senior year?
Such a good question, excuse me. And I hope you'll forgive me when I say 8th grade.
Oh,
And I say it and I hate it. And the reason is, in a lot of communities, I think there's way too much pressure on the college topic in general. And so I think we should let freshmen be freshmen and sophomores be sophomores. I think, I think, have you guys had Jennifer Brahaney Wallace, Never Enough? I mean, what a book, right? So, and
yes.
it's
Yeah,
not the case in every district, but in a lot of districts, I think there's just too much conversation about that. But here's the thing. If a student is going into high school with numerous accommodations and supports that we are not going to provide, then in my opinion, there need to be a lot of discussions about what they want to do after high school. And like, I hate the thought of asking an 8th grader, well, what do you want to do when you're 18? Like, I want to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or, I want to have a cool car. Like, but we need to think about how we're going to move them to a place by the end of senior year where they're not utilizing a lot of the supports. And by the way, this also applies if they're going to go out to the work world. Certain things, certain self-determination and self-advocacy skills. There needs to be a certain amount of literacy, right? Or the ability to utilize technology if they have a severe reading disorder or challenges, with writing. So nobody makes a plan for something without knowing what they're planning for, right? So my job is to tell you what this environment looks like, and then for everybody involved on the team to say, here's where we are, here's what the other environment looks like, and how do we get from here to here in 4 years. And so I think it's an excellent question. And, it not for a moment suggesting start freshman year, pull all their accommodations. That's not what I'm talking about. Whatever the accommodation is accommodating, where is the skill deficit? And what skills do we need them to learn so that we can move away from providing this? So that is really the ultimate goal. So the example of, a lot of my colleagues not providing extensions for deadline extensions, extra time. What are we going to do? We need to teach students how to utilize planners. And there are these things called, and I know they're in the handouts. There's a link to what's called an assignment calculator, I think, or an assignment planner. And for some reason, they seem to be located on college library sites. Obviously, because this is not a disability specific problem. Lots of college students have trouble planning out long-term projects. And so in the link in the handouts, you can go to the University of Toronto's one that I just happen to like and use with my college students. And you plug in what day you're going to start the paper, what day it's due. And this one has a drop down of, is it a research paper? Is it an argumentative essay or whatever? And then it creates a schedule for students to follow. And it lays out all the steps. And so that is only one part of the strategy. Then the student has to put those things in their calendar. Students need to get used to some kind of planner. I know a lot of students hate them, but I don't, and a planner can take lots of different forms, but there must be a planner of some sort. And put those deadlines in there, and then parents can start to talk to them about, like, oh, what's the next stage of this? Well, what do you have plans? Oh, you're going to go to the football game this weekend. Sorry, I don't know why football's on my mind after Thanksgiving weekend. Oh, you're going to the football game on Saturday? That's going to take this many hours. I can't help noticing that on Monday, your own schedule says you'll have this. how are you going to arrange your time on the weekends to make sure this gets done? And so involving them in the process, not just laying out those steps for them, because they're going to have to figure this all out. You know, I talk to students at the college level a lot about time management. It's like, oh, is it spring festival this weekend? Great. Are you going to be in a condition on Sunday to do that work? You know, after being out all day on Saturday, should you get this stuff done Friday before the weekend comes? And so, you know, getting them thinking for themselves about how they utilize their time is an example.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. We've got 6 questions for you here, Elizabeth. And I want to make mention of the fact that, yes, Never Enough Jennifer Wallace, that program is on our YouTube channel. Check it out. And I also want to mention February 27th, Sarah Ward and Jessica Minahan will be talking.
Oh, yeah.
They're wonderful about
Yeah.
the organizational skills, not to be missed with a case workshop the next day. Next up with a question is Erin Leroy. She is District 203 Naperville Central Counseling Chair.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for sharing your presentation today. I really liked the resources that you provided through your blogs on your website, but specifically, I just wonder, like, in terms of a starting point for parents to have conversations, if there's anything like a checklist of like important conversations to have throughout high school, or one like takeaway resource that you would say, like, this is a great starting point.
Wow, I've never been asked that question in all this time. Off the top of my head, no, but maybe I should create one. I'm hoping somebody else has done it and saved me the work. Um,
Good thing.
as far as the conversations go, I mean, I think in ways it's a little bit of this, you know, what do you think you would like to do? Or, you know, when they're in 8th grade and they're making the plans for 9th grade, like, have you thought at all about what you would like to do after high school? Because if they say, oh yeah, I want to do this thing that doesn't require a 4-year college degree, then, you know, the conversations can be about also, you know, does your high school provide an opportunity to do, is it called co-op? My brain is
Yeah,
a little
the
fried today.
trades
Yeah, like
program. Yeah.
co-op, because that's part of it. And so, you know, as far as if they sort of generally think like, yeah, I think I'd like to go to college, I think you can start to have that conversation in 8th grade of like, all right, well, we have 4 years, and that's a really long time. But just so you know, as we go through high school, you know, every year we're going to have these plans. And we're going to talk about the things that, you know, you're doing on your own, and our goals for the skills that you're going to work on. And so, you know, we want you to have some agency in this. We'd like for you to participate. I recognize most high school students would rather poke their own eyeballs out than have, you know, participate in these conversations. And I really strongly feel that there are different ways to have, you know, this work done. A lot of, you know, there's a lot of focus in special ed area on students running their own IEP meetings. And that to me is one of the ways that we can prepare them for self-advocacy, but it doesn't have to be the only way that we do that. I think those can be private conversations. I imagine for a lot of high school students, running a meeting with their case manager and high school teachers, you know, present is probably a very challenging thing to do, you know, with anxiety, and culturally speaking, you know, for some students being in charge of a meeting with adults is probably uncomfortable. But we can do things like have students fill out a college's registration form, and I offer a free version on my website that anybody can look at, just the kinds of questions that students will get asked on our form, and say, you know, here's the kind of stuff that a college will ask you about, and you can use it almost like as a form of pre and post testing. Ask them to do that at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year, do they have more self-awareness about what accommodations they're using? When if the school or the parents are proposing getting a waiver, generally it is in high school, of certain required classes because of a student's disability, you need to talk to the student about the fact that it could limit their college choices down the line, right? Because they may not be able to get into Hamblet University if they didn't take a certain number of years. And is that something they want? So, I love the idea of a checklist of conversations. Off the top of my head, those are just a couple of things to talk about. But, to me, it's not so much the conversations, like sit down and conversation situation, as it is about really starting to model for students the things that parents are doing. So if they are arranging all of their weekend activities, being very explicit and saying, in order for you to go do X, Y, and Z, here are all the steps I have to go through. And then planning that, by the senior year, the student will be taking over those things. Everybody talks about them making their own doctor's appointments and things like that. It can be intimidating the first time they have to call, and oh my God, I have to call, use my phone as a phone to call a doctor's office. But yeah, to really get them involved in the adulting parts of the world so that they have more confidence because they've practiced it.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
And maybe Erin has given you an idea about something down the line. Then we
Did you just give me a homework assignment, Erin?
Yes.
Okay.
Justin Lannis is up next. He is the D86 Transition Services Case Manager.
Hi, good morning, Elizabeth. Thank you for such a great presentation. And I'm in a shared space with actually a couple other people, and we are at our local community college and do the work of supporting our students while they're here on our campus.
Oh, wow.
So it was excellent to hear this. And you've answered a lot of great questions, and one that we kind of wanted to hear your thoughts and responses to were, what do you think is the greatest barrier to success for students with disabilities in college that you believe high schools can address with their college-bound focused students?
Ooh, that's a good one. I can only pick one, huh?
You can pick a few if you would.
Okay. Executive functioning is probably the thing that for students with disabilities and their neurotypical peers. And so I don't have it at my fingertips, but there was a study done fairly recently where the researcher asked students about academic challenges, and the response rates about things like time management were pretty similar. And so it is so much independence. Again, Jennifer Wallace has done such a great job of documenting overscheduled students and how much parents are involved in this stuff. My friend Ellen Broughton was recently interviewed for the Wall Street Journal and in an article about executive function coaches and how common they've become. And the fact that, students used to develop executive functioning skills when we weren't talking about them that way, by doing the things teenagers used to do, like babysitting and mowing lawns, and because it involves being organized about your time, committing to something. So I think, to stop managing their kids, and again, always teach them first, never just pull the rug out from under them. But start to say, look, I'm not going to be doing these things for you anymore. I am not waking you up for school anymore. And I realize that's fraught because there are punishments for students, who get to school late every day. But trying to get students to be more in charge of themselves, because that is really what they have to do. And again, I don't think it just applies to students with disabilities, but we need to put them in charge of themselves. I think most so. Additionally, I would say if you are looking at your students' accommodations and realizing that a lot of them are what I've started to explain are modifications, I think you need a plan over the 4 years. This is again why we have to start in 8th grade for what are we going to do? And again, you can involve your student and say, listen, right now you are getting, for multiple choice tests, your teachers are eliminating two possible responses on every test, but that's probably not going to happen in college. What would you like to do? Would you like to continue with this, which may help you earn better grades, but possibly, doesn't prepare you for college? And, have the student have input in that, because it's going to be on them when they get there. And so again, what skills are, who's available to teach that student some skills? Multiple choice tests are challenging for a lot of students, but what are some strategies that they can utilize? If they are not reading the same books as classmates, could utilizing text-to-speech software be the right answer for that? But to really have them meeting the same expectations as their classmates with regard to deadlines and what gets done, and how they're assessed. Because the chances of that, and that is in the appendix of my book, it's something like only 3% of students received modifications in college. And the research questions did not specify what those were, but 3% is not a lot. And so students have to be prepared for that. And that's what I want. So one of these days I am going to get that merch made up that's going to say t-shirts, mugs, competence builds confidence. And that's what I want. When students have done the work and they have met the deadlines, and maybe they didn't get the A, maybe they got a C minus, but they also know that when they get to college, they will have had practice doing the things that are expected of them. And it won't be so anxiety provoking, because that is what I want for them. I mean, a lot of students, all of us, go to college and have to adjust the way we're doing things, right? Because it's just different. It's a different environment. The demands are higher. But at least if they have been doing the same as their classmates, they have that confidence going into it. And that's what I want, because the anxiety is real. And, for some students, that is their issue. But I worry that if students go to college aware of how much adults have been scaffolding and supporting them and doing things for them, that they will have increased anxiety going to college, knowing that now they're in charge of themselves.
Thank you. Sarah Sarah is up next. She is a transition services facilitator for Glenbard Transition Services at the College of DuPage.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks so much. That was actually our group question, but I did just want to ask you if, now that you kind of know what we do, we're here on campus, giving transition services to our students still coming from the high school. Elizabeth, do you see that in other parts of the country? Is this specific to Illinois? Have you heard of high school support still being given on college campuses, or are we an island unto ourselves?
So these are for students who have graduated from high school?
So they're duly enrolled, they're still.
Dual enrollment is a whole other kettle of fish. Yeah. And that is something I don't have any experience with. Anecdotally, I certainly hear about these programs. I don't know how widespread they are. And a lot of folks think they're a great way for students to start to get accustomed to the college environment. And again, remember, this is not legal or medical advice. My understanding just from the communication, conversations in my community are that if the student is earning college credit, they will have the accommodations determined by the college's disability services office, which may not be the same as they get under their IEP for classes where they are earning high school credit. And I can only parrot that information, and I can't go farther than that.
Yes,
Okay.
and our job is to scaffold that to make sure our students are receiving those accommodations. So that's our role. They do not receive the high school accommodations any longer, even though they still have the supports.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Next up, Mary, you have a question. Mary is the Director of CASE Special Ed Cooperative.
So I join all my colleagues here in thanking you for your time and all of this information. I was very excited about your mentioning of your YouTube channel, and very specifically, I loved the idea of being able to review the college disability areas to really kind of get a better feel for what they provide. And I was wondering if you could give us just a sneak peek into that little video and give us something to look for, if that would be okay.
So what you might want to look for is, for instance, how many people work in the office? And if they offer that information, what is their background? There are some studies that I think are publicly available that my organization, meaning my professional organization that I belong to, it's AHEAD, Association on Higher Ed and Disability, does a member survey every 2 years. And I think, what they publish or what they ask about varies, but I think often it says like, what's your master's degree and what's your bachelor's degree in? Look around to see what kinds of accommodations they mention. Again, be aware that just because an accommodation is mentioned, it doesn't mean every student is going to have, the same shot as getting that. Also, do they mention anything that they do that goes beyond the minimum? Do they have a study lounge? Do they have learning specialists? Do they offer, excuse me, workshops every month on, time management, organization, reading strategies, things like that? And also what you may find is that there's a link to the general like academic support center. So, there may be great supports that just aren't provided by us, that aren't a disability accommodation. And that can be really important to know too. So just because we're not doing it and your student doesn't have to qualify doesn't mean it's not there. So sometimes students want peer mentors. And maybe that is available through the dean's office. Check the health services. Can they refill prescriptions for stimulants? If your student, I see people in Facebook groups saying, my student needs an infusion. They have a serious disease and they need an infusion every week or so. Can the health services do that? And if not, like, is there public transportation to a local hospital? So, depending on your student's needs, what kinds of things do they hope to see?
Thank you. Dawn Langdon, you are up next, Student Services Coordinator for Transition at Glenbar District 87. Go ahead, Dawn.
Hi, Elizabeth. I want to thank you for all of your information, and mine is more of a thank you than a question, but just thank you for making it such a big point that students need to be a part of this process so early and have that key understanding of what their accommodations are and why they need those accommodations. I think that that's one of the biggest struggles sometimes that we see from high school transitioning even into that post-secondary piece is students and really having that understanding and being able to advocate for themselves as well as to why they need a certain accommodation. So I just want to thank you for bringing that to such an important light.
Thank you. And, if the high school can't explain how it's, related to the student's disability, then maybe it's time to have a conversation about why that accommodation is being provided. Right? There needs to be a link. What you'll see on disability services sites is something like, we need to see a link between the requested accommodation and the student's area of functional limitation. And that's sort of, the wording somewhat out of the law, but that's what it has to be.
Elizabeth, I have a question for you. What do you think is the biggest mistake that families make with this process?
Ooh, that's a good question. The biggest mistake. I think maybe it's not a mistake because the biggest challenge, meaning they don't do it deliberately. The biggest challenge of my work, and I love this question, Gilda, thank you, is getting people to seek out information that might challenge what they've already heard. So in other words, if you are in the, Smithville, I'm just making up a town, Smithville parent Facebook group, and parents there are saying, oh, when your kid goes to college, they're going to get this, they're going to get that. Why would you go check that information, right? People are telling you this, and, most of us take trust in others. And so they need to research for themselves what the college environment really holds, because all of these assumptions about what happens, to me, can cause families to not focus on the kinds of preparation their student needs for eventual transition to college. If you assume we are going to, give them a few extra days, right? And I keep harping on this one, but it comes up so often in my community that every time something's due, they're going to get a few extra days. You're not going to see a reason to take have your student while they're in high school work on meeting deadlines and develop those skills. You're going to ask the high school to give them that accommodation, and maybe the high school will. And so if everybody tells you that it's easy to get, and then your student only finds out when they get to college, it's not, that's really hard. So I don't think it's a deliberate mistake. I can only just say that, trust, then verify, sort of, when you hear information, check for yourself. What is really challenging is finding trustworthy sources. So there are lots of folks out there talking about college transition, and some of them really know their stuff. How do you assess who knows? I don't know, but if you hear something that, sounds interesting to you, contact the local college's disability services and ask them. And, if they'll answer that question, it's not a big deal. And by the way, because this is a myth too, they will not take down your name, get your phone number off the caller ID. I've been really saddened to hear all of the things that families worry about this process, and my heart breaks, especially because so much of it's not true. So disability services offices have no interest in finding out who's calling them to ask questions. It's just not what we do. We're there to serve and to help. And so if you call us, or even better, your student calls us and says, hey, I saw some lady from New Jersey and she said, it's not common to get extended time for for papers. They may say, well, here we, sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. Or, I saw this speaker say that everybody who asks for a single room at college gets that. Is that true at your school? That could be a way to sort of get a sense. And again, it only applies at that school. But people talk in these, gross generalizations and speak as though it's carved into a stone. Like if your testing is older than 3 years, the school won't accept it. That was never true. That all colleges were like that, and it is definitely not true now. And so I am empathetic to this, because people tell you stuff and you take them at their word. And it has been my experience. I did 2 professional development programs where teachers and case managers told me they moved all of their students to 504 plans for senior year because they themselves assumed that 504 plans were valid at college. So nobody in that group of professionals verified that information. They were just doing that.
Verified.
And so thank you. I mean, you've given me an opportunity to climb up on my soapbox and say, you really need to check this information. A lot of people interpret their students' own experience at college to be broadly applicable. Like, again, sometimes students do get extended time for papers and projects, and that parent might get into a parent group and say, oh yeah, my kid got it, your kid will get it. You have no idea.
Good. This is the final question.
Sure.
What is the question you get asked most often?
Ooh, that is a good question. I don't know if I have something off the top of my head. I do get asked about probably what are the most commonly approved accommodations. That's probably the one I get.
Mm-hmm. And what is your final word for us today?
My final word for today is I hope that you found this helpful, and I want it to be empowering. I recognize that some of the stuff that I talked about in this presentation is worrying to families. And I understand that worry. And if that was the response that you had to this, there's still time, and you still have a lot of opportunities to assess where your student is, figure out, what's the timeline? Are they current, seniors in high school? How much time do you have to work on these skills that we've talked about? And to know that, as a SMART consultant, I know says, going to college is not binary, meaning you either go right after high school or you never go. There are lots of different approaches to going to college if that's what your student wants. And so I want you to take a breath, think about what we've talked about. Maybe your student is doing all the things that we talked about and they're going to do great next year if they're seniors. And if not, think about and work with the team on where they are, where they need to go. Involve your student in that choice. If they find out that all of this stuff is going to result in, their grades going down and that's not what they want to do, that's fine. Be upfront with them about the fact that this stuff will not be available to them and allow them to make that choice.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. We will be back with you tonight at 7 p.m. Central Time. Please come, those of you that are listening, tell someone, might be a school staff, it might be a friend, a relative, let them know. We'll be taking your questions in the Q&A in the chat tonight at 7. You mentioned Elizabeth Bratton, and she the author of the book, Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less. She'll be with us on January 9th at noon at 7 p.m. Thank you to Mary and Ebony and Aaron and Justin, and Ray was here, and Sarah and Dawn and Elizabeth. Big applause for you for all of this important information. 7 Steps to College Success, a pathway for students with disabilities. Pick up the book. It's a great one.
Thank
And we'll
you
see you
so
soon,
much.
everybody. Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Have a
it. See you
great day.
tonight.
See you tonight. Take care.
Bye.
Excellent, excellent. I took a lot of notes. I'm going to tell you my takeaways. Tell me how I did. Okay.
Okay.
So I love the way you said that. I mean, if we think about, we don't have case managers at college, we have coordinators at college. So, and it really is up to the student to decide whether they want to mention that disability or not, because the college is not going to ask, that student has to decide how much they want to reveal. They are expected, students with disabilities are expected to meet the same requirements. And because colleges, most of them, you said most of them, except federal funds, they do have to provide some basic accommodations, but don't depend on hearsay. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Check the
Absolutely.
school's website, do your homework to make those informed decisions. High school transcripts will not reveal that if your child had a 504 or IEP. The SAT test, that won't it won't indicate if your child had accommodations. Make sure your child is knowledgeable about their disability, because so much of what you've talked to us tonight is about how they need to be able to communicate. They need to be an advocate for themselves and help them as they get older. Planners, you talked about planners. The goal is to help them get a way of those supports so they can self-determine. Those are my takeaways. What do you think?
They're excellent. You're a very good student, Gilda.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
I mean, and actually that's a
you.
great point too. And you brought something up I just didn't mention. Because I do get all sorts of questions and things that I wouldn't even think people would be worried about, which kind of breaks my heart. So, and there is a blog post about this on my site. Somebody said, well, if I call Hamblet University's Disability Services, and by the way, I really prefer your students do it, but I understand sometimes parents are going to do this. But again, it's an opportunity for your students to practice self-advocacy and say, oh, hey, does Hamblet University provide copies of read and write software to students who are found eligible? People are worried that our staff is going to get off the phone and obviously go to the, what is that? The caller ID, take the phone number down and call admissions and tell them. And look, I am so sympathetic to parents. I understand that people do say some ignorant things to to you sometimes, or that that your concerns about your kid getting into the college that they love the most. You don't want anything to interfere with that. I promise you, our offices are way too busy to do that, and admissions would not talk to us about that anyway. And the part that makes me really sad is that the people who tell you this assume, and I think they're telling on themselves, in my opinion, that they assume colleges are trying to keep out students with disabilities, or that students with disabilities are somehow undesirable. And I cannot promise you, because I don't know who works at all 4,000 colleges, I don't think that's the case. So, but even if it were, first of all, I want you to think about this. I like job security. If I worked in a disability services office and somebody called, why would I if I worked in a place that was trying to keep students with disabilities out, I'd be out of a job soon. Why would I call? Why would I contact admissions and help them put me out of a job? So I don't mean, I'm not trying to mock anybody for worrying about it. I get it. And this is what I mean. The range of wild things I hear just continues to, scare me. So I get it. I know you're hearing stuff. And so I just want you to take a deep breath. You can call our office. We aren't, and here's something important too. We're not going to lie to you. We're not going to promise you things we don't provide, because that would be bad for your student and would be bad for us. We're not going to tell you that we demand that all professors provide notes to students if we don't do that, because it just creates an uncomfortable scenario. So we don't work with admissions. It's not our job to help fill seats. So please feel comfortable, that your student can call us and ask us these questions, and nothing's going to happen.
Again, I liked your advice about, even if you think you might, you reassured us, it's not going to impact our college admission one way or the other. So we're going to take your word for it. It's my experience as
That's all I
well.
know.
Do the things you have to do to be sure that you are registered when you're ready, since it's not retroactive, and have it there. Well, let's get to some questions.
Okay, and let me just add on to that too. I had, referred to, like, we can't make students do this. So what you probably makes sense to you now is, let's say your student registers with my office and their first set of exams are coming up and they say, actually, college is easy. I think I'm all right. They just don't fill out our form, and we just don't arrange their exam accommodations. If they are allowed to record their classes and they decide that taking notes is not as hard as they thought, they just don't have to. So we can't make them use accommodations. Oh, and actually, this is a really important point. Sometimes students' worst and perhaps only really conscious experience of using extended test time is when they take the SAT or ACT. And those kids cannot leave the room until the extended time is over. They can't have their phone. I don't know if they're allowed to read a book. I have never supervised these. And they might think, oh my gosh, I'm never doing that again. That's not how it works at college. When you're done with your exam, out you go. And when the last student is done, the proctor's time is over. They take all the exams and they're out. So that's also a really important thing to tell them, because for some of them, it may be the only time they've really kind of like recognized what extended time could look like. And that's not what it's like at college.
Will you talk about what you want in that transition packet again?
Sure. So again, this is not the packet that your student's going to upload to us. It's just what they will need to finish the process. So in that, again, is just this crib sheet that they've created. It's a list of accommodations, and somebody that knows them and knows why they were granted that at the high school level. It helps them write a little explanation for why it's appropriate with their disability. And so we're not expecting PhD level explanations, but some folks' forms say, why do you need this? And I want them to be prepared to answer that question. And then the documentation, because a lot of colleges, I don't know if there are any that don't require any documentation, but I'm always open to the idea that could be happening. But generally, your student will have to not only say, hey, I'm a student with a disability, but here's the documentation that shows that I am. And they just need to have that ready to upload. I've been doing this for so long. Used to be that we were talking about a physical packet about putting a photocopy of the documentation in it, but now we're just uploading.
Got it. Can you find out what accommodations are available before you apply to college?
So that's a great question. Some colleges have lists of accommodations, and one that I have come across that is very thorough is Rutgers University here in New Jersey, where I live, RUT. Gers. Jerica, if you could just type that in, Rutgers University, in case folks haven't heard of it. If you navigate to their disability services page, I hope it's that one. If you can't find it, email me and I'll shoot you the link. They just happen to have a really nice list of all kinds of accommodations. But here's what maybe this person is asking. So if you're applying, your student's applying to Hamlet University, it's December of their senior year, and they want to know, hey, Elizabeth, if I come to your school, what accommodations am I going to get? I have seen an occasion, a colleague say that they do have the ability to review. Yeah, exactly the right one, Jerica. Thank you. They can review your students' documentation and their requests and tell them before they even get accepted that what they might get. I think that's highly unusual if it's happening at all. Now, what is unfortunate and that you need to be aware of is, let's say your student gets their acceptances in May, they have to make their decision by June, right? June 1st. Most of my colleagues do not have enough staffing to go through requests from students who have even been accepted but not enrolled yet to help them make a decision about where they're going. I know that's unfortunate. I just want you to be aware of that. But for a really extensive list of accommodations across all sorts of settings, like I said, you can look at that Rutgers site. And in chapter 7 of my book, I go through really just academic accommodations because that's what I know well, with some explanations not only about what's available commonly or not and why, and or like what some of the specifics are, as I said, you know, about who gets extensions for deadlines and things like that.
If someone is asking about as they've gone on tours and they've seen that some have discussed early registration as an accommodation. Do you see this often?
I see discussions of it. Again, you know, what's so hard, and I wish I had for you, is we're just not doing, nobody's doing research to find out like what percentage of students that are registered with our offices get, you know, a particular accommodation. So I can tell you one of my colleagues specifically said that they actually cut back on providing priority registration because they realized at that point, the majority of students were getting priority registration for one reason or another. But, you know, keep in mind, like athletes sometimes get priority registration because they want to be able to pick classes that don't interfere with practice. So it is something, and what it means at different schools can be different. So if you've never heard of priority registration, it means registering before some other group, and it varies, like I said. So at some colleges, if you get it as a freshman, it means you get to register for classes before other freshmen. At some schools, it means you get to register even before seniors. It all depends. And some schools may be very generous with that, and others may not be.
Do colleges allow test retakes with opportunity to earn up to 85%? Our school allows this for everyone.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay, so if they're doing it for everybody, then to me, it's not an accommodation, right? That's a great question. So that is actually something we specifically, when we talk about modifications, we're talking about. So in the wording of 504, and not in the college section, but when it talks about auxiliary aids and what they're supposed to be for and provide, and I'm botching this, but it's that accommodations are basically meant to live at the playground. I happen to have the book right here. Hang on a second. Because I think the wording is really interesting and it speaks directly to this. Let me see if I can find it real fast. So I can't find it quickly, but it's in chapter 1. So basically it says something like, we have to do stuff to allow students an equal opportunity, but that we don't have to like guarantee that accommodations are not intended to guarantee success or something to that effect. So the example that this person just gave, it, to me, it's not an accommodation if absolutely everybody can access it. It is not and a professor at college can do that for all their students if they choose to. And sometimes, you know, I see individual anecdotes about professors doing this because what they really want is for students to learn the content. However, if you're asking about would our office approve that as accommodation, that is something that we see as falling into a modification. And I don't think it's very common. And in fact, again, like that large longitudinal study that I was talking to you about doesn't have the kinds of details that I think we would all like to have. But for modified or alternative tests in this sample of students, 37% got that approved at the high school level, and fewer than 1% got it at the college level. Shorter or different assignments, 30% got in high school, 3% got at the college level. Modified grading standards, again, they didn't provide details about what that meant. 29% in high school, 1% at college.
You talked about community college. You know, if your child is mature and is doing well, and can advocate for themselves, then college, four-year college will probably be fine, you've said. Otherwise, consider a junior college. So here's a question. Could another post-high school option be attending college, but commuting from home, not live on campus, but live at home?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. I don't know anything about commuting, you know, being a non-resident student or whatever they call it. I assume that's an option at a lot of colleges. I don't know. One thing I think you want to find out is to have your student be able to talk to some commuters. And this is entirely personal and outdated and anecdotal. But a hallmate of mine married a guy who had been a commuter student and found it was very hard being a commuter where we went to school because of so much stuff happened at school and he wasn't there for that. So it certainly could be an option. The only reason I said community colleges is that a lot of them that I am aware of, at least here in New Jersey, don't have housing, and so everybody's a commuter. It's a good question though.
Is there a way to determine which schools are more flexible and willing to work with kids who need assistance?
So that is, I understand where people want. I think flexible is in the eye of the beholder, and I just think generally, and not to be facetious, when students get the things that they request, they view schools as being flexible. When they don't get what they want, they see them as not being flexible, even though sometimes their expectations for what the college will provide might not be reasonable. And so if they go off and say Hamlet University is very inflexible because I said they couldn't retake every test for a better grade, you're going to hear that and not understand the backstory, so to speak.
Chris has a question about the summary of performance that's
Yeah.
generated at the end of the senior year. Is that something that parents receive, and should they forward that to disability services?
So it should be something that parents receive. And by the way, my K through 12 knowledge is so old. I'm not even sure they had SOPs when I was still teaching at high school. So it's something that the high school has to generate the special ed department for those graduating seniors on IEPs. First of all, they really vary in format. When I was looking at them for the second edition of my book, I think, one of the things I saw was there was a summit in 2007 of professionals that put together a model template, but it's not enforceable. It was just a suggestion of like, here are all the things that could be in it. So I would first of all, parents, it would be something your student would include with their documentation if anybody was going to do anything. And it's always their option. A lot of colleges probably won't ask for it. Again, it's just something that's required by IDEA. So now that you understand that we don't have anything to do with IDEA, it was meant to be useful to students transitioning to work or college. And how useful it is to the College Disability Services offices will vary based on what's in it, I suppose.
You talked about how some accommodations, software, for example, might be responsibility might be with the family. Do you think is financial aid sometimes available for that?
That is a great question. I don't know anything about financial aid. So, can you use, usually I would think financial aid gets applied right to, right, the tuition bill. I don't know, but that's a great question to ask. And you could call the Disability Services office and say to them, when, you know, if you guys don't provide this, do you have any experience? Do you know if students are able to use that? That's a great question. And here's another thing I don't know anything about. I can only just scratch the surface of saying some students, not all, are eligible for services. I don't know if you've ever had a speaker like this, Gilda, for registration with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And so it's not everybody, sometimes students with mild disabilities are not eligible. Again, I don't really know anything about this except to sort of name check it, if you will. And I've heard tales of students being, who, if they were found eligible, being able to use some of their VR funds for things like that software. I don't know how widespread it is. I imagine it's, you know, and it varies from state to state, who's eligible, what's available.
Very good. We are down almost to the wire here. Are medical 504s treated differently than academic 504s?
Again, in that none of them are valid at college.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, maybe this person missed the introduction. So 504 plans are not valid once your student graduates from high school. So it might serve as a form of documentation. My experience with 504 plans is that they don't often have a lot of information that is helpful to our office in understanding what your student's disability is. And maybe that's just based on the ones I've seen. But just be aware that even if your student, no matter what kind of 504 plan they have, colleges are not required to follow them.
Bears repeating. This is our last question.
Sure.
You are in an elevator with a student who has a disability, about to go to college, and a
Okay.
parent. And you can't help but overhear the conversation. And there's something that you want to say to that student because you have all of this knowledge and experience, and there's something that you want to tell the parent. And it's a very long elevator ride. So what are you going to say to the student and what are you going to say to the parent?
Wow. Okay. I have a couple different thoughts. Let's see. I think, and we talked about this in the noon session. I would say to the parents, competence builds confidence. We talked about that last time. Now, what I mean is, and we've talked about this tonight too, having your student meet the requirements that their classmates are meeting, you know, without modifications. They may not get as high grades as they've gotten if you're getting things modified for them, but what they will get is experience in taking the same tests and completing the same assignments, and that will prepare them for college because that is probably what's going to happen there. And I want them to come to college knowing they have that experience. And again, maybe they didn't get as high grades as they would have liked, but they've got the practice, and that's what I want for them. I want them to come knowing, yeah, I got this. I did that in high school. And as far as students go, I want them to know that the accommodations are available, that they are not they're not a giveaway. They are not cheating. They are not, what are the other things I've seen in the research? It's not altering standards, because I've already told you we don't do that. And that we exist, our offices are there because we expect students with disabilities to come and to need accommodations. And we are here to level the playing field. We're not going to make it easy for them. And so they shouldn't feel any hesitations about registering with us. And again, if, dang, college is easy for them, good on them. They don't have to use them.
Beautiful. Well, we've spent many hours with you and filled with information. It was just a pleasure hosting you today. Really, really enjoyed it. And the fact that we have so many people still here after 90 minutes speaks to the fact that this was great information that we all need to hear. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. I hope you found it helpful. And this is the last thing I want to say. I'm hoping this information leaves parents feeling empowered. I know some of it is anxiety provoking. I feel bad about that. It's not my favorite thing about my job, but being informed is so important because then you know what you have to do to get your student prepared. And that's why I'm out here. And thank you so much to GPS, especially to Gilda, for allowing me this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Fabulous. Just great. Elizabeth, this is where we go hug the kids. So we're going to go hug the kids now.
I'll do that. All right. I'm going to go to bed. It's East Coast time. Bedtime for me. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. See you next time. Thank you.